They say humanity's story is only 6,000 years old, a brief flicker of light after a long, dark night. But scattered across the world are places, stones, symbols, and anomalies that whisper a different possibility. That long before Egypt, before Sumer, before the first pottery or the first city, a civilization walked the earth and left clues behind. Not a legend, not a myth, a civilization erased not by time alone, but by the planet itself. Because Earth does not keep memories. It destroys them. Oceans rise, ice collapses, mountains grow, crumble, and reform. Continents sink into the mantle through subduction, vanishing in silence. And everything built upon them, every wall, every temple, every written word, is wiped away. If a culture existed 12, 20, even 30,000 years ago, the Earth would have erased almost every trace. Almost. And yet traces remain. The story begins beneath the shoreline, a boundary that did not exist for most of human prehistory. During the last ice age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower. The coastlines we know today did not exist. In their place stretched vast landscapes. River valleys, plains, ridges, and settlements now drowned beneath the weight of the world's oceans. Divers exploring the Gulf of Cambay in western India once followed a sonar anomaly. When they descended, they found geometric blocks scattered across the seafloor, long, linear foundations, broken but recognizable. Fragments of worked stone, straight edges where only chaos should exist. Many dismissed it as natural. Some still do, but the impression remained. If a civilization thrived on the ancient coasts, today those coasts lie underwater, erased by rising seas. And across the planet, the same pattern appears. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, an enormous staircase descends into the dark blue of the Pacific. Massive terraces cut at crisp angles. Platforms like abandoned plazas. Deep channels carved with unnerving precision. Some geologists say it is natural. Others look at the perfect right angles and see intention, not coincidence. But whether crafted or enhanced by human hands, the deeper mystery remains unspoken. Why do we find anomalies exactly where Ice Age coastlines once existed? It raises a quiet but devastating possibility that the first civilization lived not on the continents we inhabit now, but along the shores that no longer exist. A world lost beneath the waves, and yet the ocean is only one form of erasure. The Sahara was once green, a land of rivers, lakes, and grasslands. Ancient rock art depicts giraffes, buffalo, even crocodiles, animals impossible in today's desolation. Among the drifting dunes lie circular structures, buried alignments, and remnants of stonework that seem too deliberate to be accidents. Some appear older than the cultures that supposedly built them, but the desert reveals nothing easily. Shifting sands open their secrets only to swallow them again. Then there are places where the stone itself seems to resist explanation. High in the Peruvian Andes stands a city built of cyclopean blocks, stones shaped into irregular polygons that interlock with impossible precision. Sacsayhuaman is the most famous example, but it is not the only one. Across the plateau lie walls, platforms, and foundations made of stones so large that even modern cranes would struggle to lift them. Surfaces smoothed like glass, edges so tight a blade cannot pass between them. The Inca, masterful engineers of terraces and fortifications, always insisted these older structures were the work of the first ones, a people who lived before them, whose name was forgotten even by myth. And the Andes are a young mountain range. Too young, according to some researchers, to explain weathering marks on certain stones. Marks that imply an age far older than the ruins atop them. Move to another continent, and similar whispers emerge. In Turkey, The stones of Göbekli Tepe rise from the dusty plateaus, towering pillars carved and erected at a time when humans were supposedly nomadic hunter-gatherers. 12,000 years old, maybe older. Yet the site was deliberately buried, sealed beneath tons of earth long before recorded history began, as if someone wished to hide it or protect it. The carvings on its pillars show animals, symbols, and patterns that appear in cultures scattered across the world. A shared symbolic language, or a coincidence born from human imagination? The deeper one looks, the more the pattern repeats. Ruins that appear older than their builders. Stones shaped by techniques not found in the societies attributed to them. Global similarities in myths, symbols, and architectural styles. Cataclysm stories told by cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Floods, fire from the sky, darkness lasting generations. A world ending and beginning again. And behind these fragments lies a question as fragile as it is overwhelming. What if humanity is not the first technological species on this planet? Not technological in the modern sense, no metal towers, no electronics, no machines, but a civilization with knowledge, navigation, astronomy, stone engineering, symbolic systems, architecture capable of surviving for thousands of years. A civilization erased by a global event, preserved only in scattered hints that survived by accident, not intention. The Earth resets itself. 12,000 years, the heartbeat of planetary catastrophe cycles. Volcanic winters.
Rapid climate shifts.
Sea level rises. Impact events. Solar outbursts. Each reset destroys almost everything. Almost, because what survives is stone. Basalt pillars on remote plateaus. Weathered megaliths half buried in mud. Foundations beneath foundations beneath foundations. Symbols cut so deep they endure even after the cultures that carve them are dust. And through these fragments, a faint outline emerges, like a constellation of clues waiting to be connected. A world before our world. A civilization before our civilization. A story older than memory, older than myth, older than the continents as we know them. And if the first civilization truly existed, it would not have left a single city, or a single monument, or a single scripture. It would have left what we see now, traces, scattered, broken, silent, but global. A pattern so large it only becomes visible when you look at Earth as a whole. Something did not just happen in India, or Japan, or Peru, or the Sahara. It happened everywhere. The first civilization, if it ever walked this planet, left clues all over Earth. Clues we can no longer ignore, and what those clues suggest is far more unsettling than the mystery itself. And what those clues suggest is far more unsettling than the mystery itself, because the pattern does not point to a single site or a single culture or a single moment in time. It points to a network, a world once interconnected not by empire, but by knowledge. Knowledge that appears mysteriously in places where it should not exist. On a windswept plateau in Namibia, geometric engravings appear on stones that stand alone in an empty desert, aligned to celestial events long before such observations were recorded. Across the ocean in the American Southwest, ancient petroglyphs depict spirals, suns, and cosmic patterns eerily similar to symbols found on the far side of Africa. No boats, no written contact, no trade routes. Yet the marks echo one another, as though drawn from a shared memory deeper than geography. Further north, in the British Isles, stone circles dot the land with astronomical precision. Their construction spans millennia, yet their alignments point to a tradition older than even the oldest stones. Standing among them, one feels less as though stepping into a ruin and more as though standing at a fragmentary interface, a broken piece of a system that once extended far beyond the horizon. Travel east into Central Asia, and the land tells another story. In the mountains of Kazakhstan, solitary megaliths sit atop ridges that today host no settlements. Their placement suggests observation points, markers aligned with sunrise and sunset thousands of years before local pastoral cultures developed the skills or tools to drag stones of such weight. And yet the stones are there, waiting, watching. What ties these places together is not cultural similarity. It is the fact that they do not belong where they are found. They do not match their surrounding history. They do not arise from the cultures that inherited them. They feel like messages from a deeper layer of time, a layer that should not exist. Look closer and the pattern sharpens. Across the Levant, curious symbols appear on prehistoric artifacts. Abstract shapes, crosshatches, chevrons, and repeating motifs. They appear again in Anatolia, then in the Caucasus, then in southeastern Europe, traveling inexplicably across vast distances and thousands of years. Some call this diffusion, others see coincidence. But the deeper mystery remains. Human creativity is infinite, yet these early symbols follow a strangely unified grammar, as though part of a single root language, one that predates writing by tens of thousands of years. And this symbolic grammar behaves exactly like the remnants of a collapsed system, not isolated inventions, but shrapnel from a broken hole. The Earth holds many such fragments. In the Amazon rainforest, LiDAR scans reveal geometric earthworks hidden beneath the canopy. Circles, squares, long straight lines cutting through dense vegetation. Structures older than the rainforest itself, older than the cultures credited with constructing them. A lost system of land management, water control, possibly even urban planning, buried under centuries of soil and roots. Further south, in the deserts of Chile, geoglyphs stretch across arid plains in the form of lines, animals, and arrows pointing toward distant peaks. Their scale defies comprehension, patterns best understood not from the ground, but from the air. Yet they were made long before flight existed, unless flight in some form was known in a forgotten age. Not mechanical flight, but the flight of perspective, the flight of knowledge, the flight of mathematics capable of mapping vast landscapes. The pattern sharpens further still when one examines the world's oldest myths. In Mesopotamia, stories speak of a time when the gods walked among humans, teaching them the arts of civilization. In Egypt, Zep-Tepi the first time describes an era before the pharaohs, when a divine order built structures now lost. In Mesoamerica, legends tell of a race of tall beings who raised stones as easily as placing children's toys. In Polynesia, ancestral memories speak of a land that drowned beneath rising waters, forcing survivors to scatter across the ocean. Different cultures, different languages, different continents, yet the same motifs. A world before our world, ended suddenly, preserved only in fragments. One could label it coincidence. One could label it mythic archetype. But mythic archetypes do not carve stones. They do not align temples with solstices. They do not drown entire coastlines beneath oceans. And that is where the most compelling clues lie, in the very shape of the Earth. At the end of the last ice age, something happened. In a geological instant, sea levels surged. Weather patterns shifted. Animal species vanished. Human populations scattered. Entire landscapes transformed beyond recognition. Within a few thousand years, the blink of an eye in geological time, Earth reorganized itself. Whatever stood near the old coasts was lost. Whatever languages existed were broken. Whatever knowledge persisted was carried by survivors who no longer had the means to express it fully. It is no wonder that the first farmers appear suddenly. No wonder that the first astronomers seem inexplicably advanced. No wonder that monumental architecture emerges with shocking maturity. We call this dawn of civilization, But perhaps it is not a dawn. Perhaps it is a rebirth. The first civilization, if it existed, did not vanish cleanly. It degenerated. It shattered. It became myth and memory, carried by wanderers into lands untouched by the catastrophe. They rebuilt what they could, simplified what they could not explain, turned knowledge into ritual, turned science into myth, turned history into stories whispered around fires. And their scattered descendants, over thousands of years, slowly became us. The thought is unsettling, not because it challenges the timeline of civilization, but because it suggests a deeper question. If we are the descendants of a forgotten world, then what exactly was lost? We look at the ruins, the symbols, the myths, and we try to imagine what might have stood before. But imagination is a faint light compared to what the evidence quietly implies. Because the traces left behind by this hypothetical first civilization do not point to a society of simple huts or scattered tribes. They point to knowledge, not modern knowledge, not industrial, something older, quieter, but extraordinarily refined. A knowledge rooted in the rhythms of the planet, the movement of stars, and the shaping of stone itself. This becomes clearest in the places where stone refuses to lie. In the mountains of Armenia, at a site called Karahunj, dozens of standing stones rise from the plateau, each pierced by circular openings drilled with astonishing precision. The arrangement of these stones resembles an astronomical instrument, a prehistoric observatory aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and star positions more than 7,000 years old. But some of the stones show weathering far older than that, as though the site was built, rebuilt, repurposed, and restored over multiple eras, each new culture inheriting something it no longer fully understood. A similar story unfolds thousands of kilometers away in the Ethiopian highlands, where clusters of monoliths stand in silent rows. Some are carved, some are plain, some are aligned to celestial patterns lost to modern memory. Yet local traditions say the builders were not ancestors, they were the ones before. Travel westward, and the pattern continues. In the Canary Islands, the Guanches spoke of sacred mountains and ancestors who came from lands drowned beneath the sea. They mummified their dead, built step pyramids, and preserved myths that echo stories from civilizations half a world away. Their origins remain a mystery. So do the strange structures found on the islands, foundations of basalt blocks shaped and arranged with unexpected precision. Again and again, across continents and oceans, we encounter this same strange duality. Local cultures living simple lives atop foundations hinting at far older intelligence. It is as though the earth is a palimpsest, an ancient manuscript whose original writing has been scraped away but never fully erased. And beneath each new chapter, the faint lines of the first story still show through. The strongest of these lines appears in the most unlikely of places, not on land but under glaciers. In Antarctica, beneath 2 kilometers of compressed ice, radar scans reveal mountain ranges, vast valleys, and shapes that resemble river systems, hints of a landscape that was once warm, wet, and exposed. Geologically speaking, Antarctica has not always been frozen, and if its last ice-free period overlapped with even a fragment of human presence, then whatever stood there is now sealed beneath the most perfect erasing mechanism on the planet. Ice is merciless. It grinds, pulverizes, and buries. If cities ever existed there, we would not know. If monuments once stood, they would now be crushed into anonymous sediments. And yet something in the way ancient maps depict the southern continent raises troubling questions. How could cultures from the Renaissance, and even the classical world, draw the outline of Antarctica with surprising accuracy, centuries before humans are believed to have reached it? Where did that knowledge come from? A fragment of a fragment, passed down from an age long drowned beneath time. The more one examines these clues, the more another realization emerges. Whatever the first civilization was, it did not leave behind a global empire. It left behind a global signature, a style, a blueprint, a set of ideas repeated by cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. Ways of cutting stone, ways of aligning structures, ways of reading the sky, ways of marking the earth with symbols still recognizable today. And this signature is clearest in the oldest stories humanity remembers. Stories so ancient they blur the line between myth and memory. Nearly every ancient culture speaks of a golden age followed by a great catastrophe. A world of knowledge shattered by water, fire, darkness, or ice. Survivors who wandered the earth, bringing fragments of the old world with them. In Sumerian myth, these survivors are the Apkallu, sages who restored what had been lost. In Egyptian tradition, they are the Shemsuhor, followers of Horus who rebuilt after a great flood. In Greek legend, they are the few who escaped Atlantis. In Native American stories, they are the people who lived before the burning sky. These stories are not identical, but they rhyme. They repeat motifs so specific and so globally distributed that coincidence strains belief. A world ends. Knowledge survives in fragments. A new age begins. This pattern, repeated across the myths of humanity, mirrors the geological truth of Earth's cyclical nature. Catastrophes do not just happen. They recur. Roughly every 12,000 years, the planet undergoes profound climatic and geomagnetic shifts, some gradual, some explosive. The last major shift occurred around 12,800 years ago, the event that ended the Pleistocene, the event that ignited massive fires, that drowned coastlines, that reshaped continents, that forced human populations into survival mode for generations. If a civilization existed before that moment, its destruction would have been almost total. Its survivors few, its knowledge reduced to whatever could be remembered, spoken, and passed down. This is why, when the Holocene finally stabilized, civilization seemed to erupt spontaneously. Agriculture appeared, megaliths appeared, astronomy appeared. Symbolic systems re-emerged with shocking sophistication. As though someone somewhere remembered, the traces we see today, the stones, the symbols, the myths, the alignments are not random. They are echoes, echoes of a world that ended, echoes left by a people who walked the earth long before us, echoes scattered across continents because the survivors scattered. The more we connect these echoes, the more the outline of the first civilization emerges. Not high-tech, not industrial, but deeply knowledgeable, a civilization that understood the sky, the earth, the stone, the cycles, the dangers, a civilization that lived through cataclysms we can barely imagine, a civilization that left behind exactly what we find today. Clues, nothing more, nothing less. And yet one question rises above all others, a question both simple and devastating. If the first civilization left clues all over Earth, then what were they trying to warn us about? Their warnings, if they exist, are not written in words. They are written in patterns, patterns woven into stone, myth, sky, and geography. Patterns that only now, with global data and modern eyes, are becoming visible again. When researchers map the world's megalithic sites on a global projection, something startling emerges. Many align not only to solstices and equinoxes, but to each other. Lines of latitude, shared angular measurements, repeated geometric proportions, as if these scattered cultures were using a common template, a memory of a system older than any one of them. Consider the number of ancient structures built along 30 degrees north. The pyramids of Egypt, the ruins of Xi'an in China, the mysterious mounds of the American South, ancient structures in North Africa, and even the enigmatic formations in the Arabian desert. These alignments make no sense for disconnected cultures. Yet they make perfect sense if the builders consciously or unconsciously inherited fragments of an older worldview, one that treated Earth as a unified whole rather than isolated regions. Geometry is a language, and across time the same numbers whisper. The golden ratio appears in monuments thousands of years apart. The same astronomical cycles, the lunar standstill, the 18.6-year nodal cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, appear encoded in sites from Britain to Peru. This is not accidental. It is not coincidence. It suggests a level of observational astronomy built over vast periods, longer than any one culture survived. To understand such cycles fully, one must watch the sky for generations, centuries, even millennia. Knowledge on that scale does not begin with the societies we know. It must have begun earlier, much earlier, and perhaps the greatest clue lies not in what the ancients built, but in what they feared. Every mythological system, from the Maya to the Greeks, from the Navajo to the Hindus, speaks of cosmic danger, a moment when the sky turns violent, when the world floods, when fire falls, when darkness descends, when the earth tilts or shakes or freezes. For decades, these stories were dismissed as the imaginative byproducts of early human anxiety. But then scientists discovered something that turned myth into possibility. In Greenland, Antarctica, and dozens of other locations, ice core samples reveal a sharp, sudden spike in microscopic platinum around 12,800 years ago, a layer of soot, melted glass-like materials, magnetic grains fused by high heat, evidence of a global firestorm, evidence of an impact or multiple impacts, the Younger Dryas boundary. This event marks the sudden end of the stable climate of the late Ice Age. Temperatures plummeted, megafauna vanished, human populations thinned, floods surged across continents. The world changed overnight. To cultures that lived through it, the memory would be apocalyptic. And the survivors, scattered, traumatized, clinging to remnants of knowledge, would record the event in the only ways they could, in myth, in symbol, in stone. What if these weren't metaphors? What if they were warnings? Warnings from people who survived the last planetary reset. Warnings passed down in the language of ritual, architecture, astronomy, and story. Warnings preserved not as prophecy, but as memory. Look at ancient temples aligned to the rising of specific stars. Look at calendars intertwined with celestial cycles. Look at myths about the sky falling, about suns dying and being reborn, about the world flooding suddenly. These are not random beliefs. They are cultural fossils, memories of a trauma so immense it shaped everything that came after. And this brings us closer to the heart of the mystery. If the first civilization left clues all over the earth, perhaps they did so because they understood something terrifying about this planet. Civilization is temporary. Stability is an illusion. Nature resets itself. And only knowledge, preserved across cataclysms, can help the next cycle survive. Maybe this is why ancient structures are built to last thousands of years. Maybe this is why they encoded astronomical data into stone. Maybe this is why survivors carried myths across oceans. Not to glorify gods, but to remember what happened, to remember what will happen again. Look at the global flood myths. They do not describe gentle rises in sea level. They describe walls of water, sudden darkness, thunder that shakes mountains, fire raining from the stars, then cold, then silence, and after the silence, wandering. Survivors who carry fragments of memory across the empty world. Fragments that become the seeds of new civilizations. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the early cultures of South America. Each one rising as though sparked by a forgotten ember. each one carrying symbols whose origins cannot be explained, each one beginning with inexplicable sophistication, only to decline, fracture, and forget. The cycle of remembering and forgetting repeats, but always at the foundation lies the same mystery, knowledge that appears older than the culture that holds it. This is the fingerprint of the first civilization. Not cities, not machines, not impossible technology. Memory. Memory so old it disguises itself as myth. Memory so broken it appears as coincidence. Memory so scattered we see only pieces, unless we look at the earth as a single canvas. Because when everything is viewed together, one final pattern appears, more haunting than any other. Many ancient monuments point not to the sky of the present, but to the sky of the past, to constellations in positions they occupied tens of thousands of years ago, to stars used as markers during ages when humanity was not supposed to have any civilization at all. This is not error. This is intentional. A star map frozen in stone. A message from a time we cannot yet place in our chronology. But why? Why carve ancient skies into monuments meant to survive the ages? Perhaps the builders knew something modern humanity has forgotten, that the stars are clocks, that Earth cycles are not random, that catastrophe is not chaos, but rhythm, a 12,000-year rhythm, the rhythm of resets. And if the first civilization lived through the last reset, they may have tried to warn the next world, us. But warnings from a vanished world would not appear as clear messages, not as inscriptions, not as preserved books, not as explicit instructions. A civilization facing extinction, whether by flood, fire, impact, or global climatic breakdown, would know that almost nothing physical could survive. Not their cities, not their libraries, not their technology, certainly not their infrastructure. Earth dismantles everything given enough time. Even entire mountain ranges disappear when the planet decides to erase them. So if a doomed civilization wanted to communicate with a future humanity tens of thousands of years later, they would need to encode meaning into something resilient, something universal, something that survives both destruction and forgetting. They would turn to the sky, to mathematics, to stone, to myth, not as prophecy, but as memory disguised as story. And when we look across Earth's oldest traditions, we find something remarkable. Cultures separated by oceans share thematic cores that should not logically overlap unless they emerged from a shared ancestral trauma. Nearly all of them tell of a world before our world, a golden age cut short by a catastrophe, a race of beings, sometimes human, sometimes gods, sometimes ancestors, who were forced to flee or descend into darkness. A flood, a fire, a darkness, a reset. These stories are not identical, but they rhyme, and in deep history, rhyming patterns matter. Take the oldest surviving myths of the Aboriginal Australians, some believed to be more than 40,000 years old. They speak of a great deluge that reshaped the coastline, an event now supported by geological studies showing that Australia's shores were dramatically different during the Ice Age. In the Kimberley region, ancient rock art depicts figures unlike any known animals or humans today. Elongated, eerily quiet forms, painted with circular halos and delicate limbs. Aboriginal elders describe them not as spirits or gods, but as the people before, beings who lived here long before modern tribes, whose ways are forgotten. In the high Andes, the Inca inherited legends of the Viracochas, tall, pale-skinned teachers who arrived after a global flood to rebuild what had been lost. Mainstream scholars interpret these myths symbolically as cultural metaphors. But the Inca insisted they did not invent these stories. They inherited them from far older cultures whose ruins they themselves discovered and incorporated. In ancient Mesopotamia, The Sumerians wrote of the antediluvian kings who reigned for thousands of years. Exaggerated, yes, but intriguing, before a great flood erased their world. These kings were said to be guided by the Apkallu, the seven sages, half-human beings associated with knowledge, city building, writing, and measurement. When their civilization fell, the sages retreated beneath the sea, a phrase often dismissed as poetic imagery, but the Sumerians meant it literally. Their knowledge, they said, came from a lost world swallowed by water. In Greece, Hesiod described the 5 ages of man, cycles of creation and destruction, echoing older Indo-European concepts of recurring worlds. In India, the Yugas describe immense cycles of decline and rebirth. In Mesoamerica, the Maya counted previous suns, previous worlds that had risen and fallen in long cycles. Plato wrote of Atlantis not as myth, but as memory, a memory given to him through Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests who insisted the story was factual, not symbolic. Across cultures, the message is consistent. This is not the first world. This is not the first humanity. This is not the first civilization to rise. And sometimes, if one listens carefully, the myths even describe remnants, survivors, carrying memory into the next age. If this is a shared inheritance, then the question becomes, where were the original centers of that lost culture? What physical fingerprints remain, if any survived Earth's relentless erasure? To answer that, one must look not at the great cities of the Bronze Age or the classical world, but at the oldest stones. The stones no one can explain. The stones that appear as foundations beneath later structures, often misattributed simply because we have no record of earlier builders. Consider the Andes. Cusco, the navel of the Inca world, sits atop cyclopean walls that the Inca themselves admitted they did not build. The precision is astonishing. Stones of irregular shapes, some as tall as a person, others weighing dozens of tons, fitted together like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Not a single gap exists between them, even after centuries of earthquakes. The Inca added layers, yes, but the deepest stones are far older. Their surfaces show weathering inconsistent with their supposed age. Some blocks have surfaces polished so perfectly they reflect sunlight like glass. Others display relief carvings that seem to map constellations or sacred geometries. Travel north to the pyramids of Caral in Peru, officially dated to around 2600 BCE, rivaling ancient Egypt in age. Yet beneath Caral, ground-penetrating radar reveals older foundations, possibly predating the known structures by thousands of years. The deeper layers show signs of water damage, as if the site once endured catastrophic flooding long before the upper architecture was built. Across the Atlantic, the oldest parts of Egypt's Giza Plateau show similar anomalies. The Great Sphinx, carved from a single ridge of limestone, displays weathering patterns inconsistent with desert erosion. Instead, the heavy vertical fissures resemble prolonged exposure to torrential rainfall, the kind Egypt has not experienced since the end of the Ice Age, around 10,000 BCE. This suggests either the Sphinx is far older than mainstream archaeology accepts, or that it stood through climatic conditions no longer present in northern Africa. In Japan, beneath the waters off Yonaguni Island, lies a stepped, terrace structure that resembles a ceremonial pyramid. Some claim it is natural. Others insist the angles are too sharp, the terraces too regular, the pillars too deliberate. But both sides agree on one unsettling fact. If it is artificial, it must date to a time when the area was above sea level, more than 10,000 years ago. Everywhere one looks, the oldest stones hint at a vanished hand. Not in a mystical way, not in a fantastical sense, but in a geological sense, as if primitive hands were modifying megaliths far older than themselves. And that brings us to one of the strangest patterns of all. There are sites that seem deliberately buried. Göbekli Tepe is the most famous example, intentionally covered with tons of soil, as if its builders wanted to preserve it for a future world. But similar cases exist. Carroll's oldest layers, enigmatic mounds in Eastern Europe, certain American earthworks, some Sahara megalithic circles. Buried, hidden, entombed, not collapsed or eroded, deliberately interred. It is an odd behavior for societies that supposedly lacked writing, mathematics, or urban planning. Why put so much effort into hiding monumental structures? Unless the structures were not meant for their time, but for another. Unless those societies were not the original builders, but the caretakers of ruins they barely understood. All of this points toward an uncomfortable possibility. If there was a civilization before the last ice age, if it endured the Younger Dryas collapse, if it had knowledge worth preserving, then its final act might have been to encode that knowledge across the world in a form resilient to forgetting. Not as instructions, not as warnings, but as seeds. Seeds that would later be rediscovered, reinterpreted, misattributed, absorbed into myth, carved into new monuments, or buried as sacred ground. And this would explain the strangest phenomenon of all: cultures emerging from the darkness of prehistory with sudden, inexplicable sophistication. Agriculture appears almost simultaneously in multiple locations, from the Fertile Crescent to the Nile Valley to China. Megalithic building erupts across Europe and Asia within a narrow window. Early American cultures develop monumental earthworks without a clear developmental ramp. The question is not whether these cultures inherited knowledge from a prior civilization. The question is, how much survived? And why does the surviving knowledge appear fragmented, like the shards of a shattered memory? It is here, in the spaces between stones and myths, that the outline of the first civilization begins to emerge. Not as a single global empire, not as an advanced technological society in the modern sense, but as a maritime, interconnected culture living in an ice age world of different shorelines, different climates, and different possibilities. A world that drowned when the ice melted. A world whose cities are now submerged beneath continental shelves. A world whose records were ground to sediment. A world whose survivors became the seed-bearers of the next age. A world erased but not entirely forgotten. And now the pieces are slowly coming together. For if clues were left all over Earth, and if these clues align across continents and millennia, then they form not a puzzle with a single solution, but a map leading deeper into forbidden history. A map pointing toward the heart of the first civilization. A map we are only beginning to read. But a map is only useful if we know what we are looking for. And to understand the true shape of a civilization erased by time, we must ask a question almost no one asks. Where would the first civilization have lived? Not where modern continents lie, but where the Ice Age world allowed life to flourish. 12,000 years ago, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. Vast stretches of land now underwater were once coastlines, river deltas, and fertile plains. The world map would have looked unfamiliar, wider, roomier, more inviting. And if one overlays the locations of mysterious underwater ruins, submerged river systems, and ancient trade routes with the coastlines of the Pleistocene, a pattern emerges. Nearly every anomaly sits along those lost shores, not deep in the ocean, not on abyssal plains, but precisely where human settlements would logically have stood during the Ice Age. Indonesia's Sunda Shelf, now a chain of islands, was once a single massive subcontinent. The Persian Gulf was a warm, fertile river valley. The Caribbean Basin held large above-water ridges and sheltered inlets. The Black Sea was a landlocked freshwater lake. Coastal India extended dozens of kilometers farther into the sea. In these drowned landscapes, we find the first hints of cities that should not exist. sunken walls off Cuba's western tip, terraced platforms around Japan's Yonaguni, underwater streets off the coast of Malta, rectangular structures off India's Cambay region, massive submerged blocks near the Bahamas, linear ridges and geometric formations near Sicily. Some of these have natural explanations. Others remain ambiguous. A few defy easy classification, but all share one feature. They lie on what were once Ice Age coastlines, precisely where early complex societies would have settled. If a civilization had emerged before the Younger Dryas, it would not have lived on mountaintops or desert plateaus. It would have thrived on these now-drowned plains. And when the ice sheets melted, suddenly, violently, those lowlands would have been the first to die. Imagine an entire world's cities swallowed in a geological instant. Not centuries, not decades, but months, perhaps even days. The survivors, forced uphill, would have carried almost nothing with them. Not libraries, not machines, not tools, only stories, only memories, only fragments of knowledge. The higher lands, plateaus, volcanic regions, mountain foothills would become the last refuges. And it is in these refuges that the next piece of the puzzle appears. On high mountains around the world stand ruins whose origins are unknown, whose builders are forgotten, and whose foundations appear older than the cultures historically associated with them. Look to the mountains of Peru. Look to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Look to the Caucasus. Look to remote regions of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Look to the Tibetan Plateau. The same signatures appear again and again: megalithic terraces, cyclopean walls, and polygonal masonry. These are not the works of nomadic tribes, nor are they random or decorative. They suggest a purposeful relocation, a desperate attempt to reconstruct fragments of a lost world in the highest places available. But why the mountains? Why build immense stone platforms in places so difficult to reach? Because if the seas were rising rapidly, devouring coastlines, flooding plains, destroying cities, the mountains would have been the last safe havens. High ground was not a choice. It was the only option, and the survivors would have needed to encode memory in a way that would outlast the chaos. Stone. Always stone. Stone ignores fire. Stone ignores water. Stone ignores the violence of human conflict. Stone outlives knowledge, outlives language, outlives empires. If the world is ending, and you want your story to survive the next age, you do not write it on papyrus or clay tablets. You carve it into the deepest bedrock you can find. This is what we see in the Andes, where gigantic polygonal blocks are fitted so perfectly that earthquakes cannot loosen them. This is what we see in Egypt, where foundational layers beneath known temples bear marks of older phases. This is what we see in Turkey, where megalithic T-pillars of Göbekli Tepe were preserved by deliberate burial, a time capsule for the future. This is what we see in Japan, where stones on sacred mountains appear older than the cultures that venerate them. This is what we see in Polynesia, where oral traditions speak of islands swallowed by the ocean and great builders who vanished under the waves. The first civilization may have been maritime, not an empire, but a network of coastal cultures sharing ideas, symbols, and knowledge. When the waters rose, they lost their cities, their libraries, their centers of learning. All that remained were the mountain sanctuaries, the fragments carried inland, and the scattered memories that later generations mythologized. But scattered memories have a strange habit. They converge when drawn together. Consider writing systems. The oldest scripts appear suddenly in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley. Different forms, yes, different symbols, but all based on the same conceptual leap. Abstract marks representing sound or meaning. Why don't we see a long developmental evolution behind them? Why do we find fully formed systems instead of crude, experimental proto-writing stretching back thousands of years? It's as if writing reemerged, not invented anew. Consider agriculture. The Fertile Crescent, the Nile, the Yellow River Basin, the ancient coast of Sunda, all show signs of abrupt agricultural adoption within a remarkably narrow time frame. Before that, tens of thousands of years of hunting and gathering. Then suddenly, domesticated grains, irrigation practices, selective breeding. Not primitive farming, but structured, organized agriculture appearing as if from nowhere. Consider megaliths, dolmens, standing stones, stone circles. They erupt across Eurasia in a prehistoric explosion of monumental building. Cultures with no known contact follow remarkably similar design principles. Why? How? From where? Global diffusion without global communication is illogical, unless the blueprint came from a shared ancestral source. And finally, consider myth. The same patterns appear everywhere. A lost world, a great flood, skyborne knowledge, beings who taught humans arts and sciences, and cycles of destruction tied to celestial events. Individually, any of these parallels could be dismissed. Together, they form a coherent pattern, a memory too old to verify, too widespread to ignore. All arrows point in the same direction, a civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas, a civilization largely erased, a civilization forced to scatter and rebuild in fragments. But if such a civilization existed, then one question becomes unavoidable. What ended it? This is where the deepest mystery awaits. Because whatever the cause, ancient cultures across the world interpreted it not as natural disaster, but as cosmic judgment. The Egyptians wrote of the destroyer star, the Maya of the Black Sunday. The Vedic texts speak of fire from the heavens, a celestial weapon. Greek myths describe Phaeton losing control of the sun's chariot, burning the earth. Native American traditions speak of the sky falling, of fire serpents, of days turning to night. Across cultures, the imagery is unmistakable. Something came from the sky. Modern science echoes the possibility. Evidence of cosmic impacts near the end of the Ice Age grows stronger each year. Microspherules, nanodiamonds, widespread charcoal layers, melt glass, all consistent with intense, rapid heating. The timing aligns perfectly with the Younger Dryas collapse, the climate's sudden lurch, the megafaunal extinction, the global fires, the abrupt sea level oscillations. A world-ending event did occur. This much science agrees on. But what mainstream science does not explore is its cultural consequence. A global catastrophe striking an interconnected coastal civilization would have obliterated it almost completely. Only those far from the coasts or already in highlands would have survived. Only those who fled inland early. Only those who understood the signs. And perhaps only those whom the myths later remembered as the teachers, the sages, or the gods. Not divine beings, not extraterrestrials, not mythic spirits, but survivors, refugees of a world that no longer exists. And if they tried to preserve their knowledge for the next cycle, for us, then the clues would be exactly what we find today. Fragments of mathematics, fragments of astronomy, fragments of architecture, fragments of myth, pieces of a shattered world scattered across continents. A map without labels, a warning without words, a memory without origin. And now, after 12,000 years, the pieces are finally being reassembled. The map is revealing its shape, and it leads to a single, overwhelming question. If the last reset erased a civilization, is the next cycle approaching? And so the question hangs in the air, heavy and unavoidable. If a civilization existed before ours, encoded its knowledge into stone, myth, and star, and survived the last planetary reset, what were they trying to preserve? What did they want us to understand? Because it is clear now, looking at the global puzzle, that they were not merely chronicling daily life. They were encoding cycles. Cycles of climate, cycles of catastrophe, cycles of human memory. A 12,000-year rhythm, written into stone, transmitted through legend, hidden in patterns across every continent. Their message is subtle, not a prophecy but a record, a survival manual for the next iteration of humanity. We see it in stone circles that align with the stars of 12,000 years ago, their positions unchangeable across millennia. We see it in submerged cities, now lying silently under oceans, their streets and foundations preserved only in sonar maps and sediment cores. We see it in myths of a great flood, repeated in cultures from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica to Polynesia, always describing a global event, always memorialized in the same symbolic language. A sun that dies, water that rises, fire from the sky, darkness that lasts. And if one follows these threads, the pattern becomes almost terrifyingly clear. These survivors, the first civilization, whatever they were, did not vanish entirely. They spread their knowledge, encoded it into the next age, and influenced the rebirth of civilization in ways we barely comprehend. The sudden appearance of fully formed agriculture, monumental architecture, urban planning, writing, and astronomy across disparate regions, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, the Americas, becomes less mysterious when viewed as resurrection, not invention. The knowledge existed before, was almost lost, and was carefully reconstructed from fragments by survivors who remembered what had been destroyed. Take Sumer, the cradle of writing. The cuneiform tablets describe kings and cities emerging abruptly, fully formed, with no known precursor cultures. Yet, if one interprets these records as the inheritance of a prior civilization, they make perfect sense. The kings are not inventors. They are curators. The temples are not first attempts. They are reinterpretations. Every aspect of early Sumerian culture, its mathematics, its astronomy, its law codes, may be a partial reconstruction of something far older, something global, something erased by catastrophe. Look at Egypt. The Great Pyramid and Sphinx stand on foundations that may predate the dynasties of Menkaure and Khufu. The Sphinx's water-worn features suggest a climate that last existed over 10,000 years ago. Who carved these stones? Who envisioned the alignment of the pyramids to the Orion Belt? If not a civilization that survived the Younger Dryas, how could humans suddenly possess the technical knowledge to achieve such feats? And this pattern repeats across the world. In the Americas, the Olmec's colossal heads and pyramidal mounds appear fully realized, without predecessors. In Polynesia, stone platforms memorialize islands that no longer exist, constructed with knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and navigation that seems impossibly advanced. In Japan, submerged structures hint at coastal settlements far older than accepted chronology. In Africa, megalithic circles sit atop layers of soil far older than the culture credited with their construction. It is all one story: scattered survivors, preserving memory, encoding it in ways designed to survive the inevitable reset of the planet. And the deeper we look, the more the pieces suggest something extraordinary. These people were aware of Earth's cyclical resets. They knew the patterns. They recorded them. They encoded them in myths and monuments alike. The recurrence of catastrophic events, floods, climatic collapses, megafaunal extinctions, cosmic impacts, was part of their empirical observation. They survived the last cataclysm, so they embedded its warning into the next age. Some myths go further, hinting at knowledge lost even to modern science. The Egyptian destroyer star, the Maya black sun, Vedic descriptions of fire from the sky. Could these reflect actual observations of cometary or asteroid events? Perhaps. And if so, their survivors would have understood with empirical clarity the stakes of planetary reset. In other words, this first civilization was not only aware of catastrophe, They encoded their survival strategy into a global mnemonic system. Stone, myth, and memory functioned as a multi-layered library designed to outlast the planet's resets. And here is the most provocative idea. What if the civilization that we know as prehistoric humanity was never the first intelligent culture on Earth? What if they were inheritors, partial reconstructors, carriers of a fragmented, partially forgotten wisdom? This theory explains more anomalies than conventional history ever could. Sudden sophistication in agriculture, architecture, astronomy. The widespread appearance of similar symbols and motifs across continents with no contact. Submerged cities and coastal ruins dating far earlier than accepted timelines. Myths and legends describing events that align with geological and astronomical evidence of real catastrophes. Megalithic construction appearing simultaneously in unrelated regions. The inexplicable knowledge of precession, lunar standstills, solstices, and equinoxes embedded in structures thousands of years older than their supposed builders. The conclusion grows inescapable. If the first civilization existed, endured catastrophe, and deliberately encoded knowledge for future generations, then humanity itself is the inheritor of a memory older than civilization itself. Not a prophecy, not magic, not extraterrestrial intervention. A memory, a survival strategy carried across time, disguised as myth, architecture, and ritual. And the implications are profound, because if Earth operates on a 12,000-year cycle, the memory is not just history. It is a warning. Every pattern we see in catastrophe, every sudden climatic shift, every geological upheaval, the planet is capable of resetting itself, partially erasing knowledge and challenging humanity anew. The first civilization did not just leave monuments. They left a guide to observing, predicting, and surviving these resets. And it is encoded across every continent, every myth, every megalith, every star alignment we have only just begun to interpret. This theory reframes human history, not as a continuous linear progression from savagery to civilization, but as a cyclical inheritance of knowledge, interrupted by planetary resets and partial amnesia. We are the latest generation in a chain of memory stretching back tens of thousands of years, and perhaps the first generation fully capable of decoding it. If this is true, then modern archaeology, anthropology, and history have been reading the fragments backward, misinterpreting inheritance as invention, survival as ignorance, mythology as mere storytelling. The true story is prehistory rewritten in memory, hidden in plain sight, and the final, chilling thought emerges. If the first civilization left warnings across the world, encoded for the next survivors of a planetary reset, what might that warning say to us today? Because the rhythms have not stopped. The cycles continue. The patterns repeat. Earth has not forgotten, and the clues are still here, waiting for humanity to notice, waiting for the knowledge to be reconstructed, waiting for the next generation to survive what may come. Perhaps the deepest legacy of that first civilization is not physical at all. Not the stones, not the symbols, not the myths. It is the concept of survival itself, memory encoded across millennia, teaching us that civilizations rise, fall, and can rise again, but only if knowledge is preserved and heeded. And that is the story the first civilization left behind. A story written into the stones, the stars, the myths, and perhaps now into us. Perhaps the deepest legacy of that first civilization is not physical at all. Not the stones, not the symbols, not the myths. It is the concept of survival itself, memory encoded across millennia, teaching us that civilizations rise, fall, and can rise again, but only if knowledge is preserved and heeded. And that is the story the first civilization left behind. A story written into the stones, the stars, the myths, and perhaps now into us. But survival, as they understood it, required more than passive endurance. It demanded observation, calculation, and anticipation. Across continents, they left evidence that they studied the cycles of the earth and the heavens with astonishing care. In megalithic sites across Europe, from the standing stones of Callanish to the circles of Karnak, the builders encoded the lunar standstill, solstices, and precessional movements, astronomical phenomena that take decades, centuries, even millennia to measure accurately. These were not the obsessions of primitive societies. These were deliberate records of patterns designed to survive the destruction of generations. In the Americas, the same meticulous care appears. The great ceremonial mounds of Cahokia, the complex urban grids of Teotihuacan, and the alignment of structures in Chaco Canyon indicate not only astronomical observation, but sophisticated mathematics and geometry. Some of the alignments point to celestial configurations that occurred thousands of years before the sites were built, suggesting the builders were preserving knowledge from a time long before their own culture emerged. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigators preserved memory in a living tradition, oral maps, star compasses, and wave patterns. Their voyages traced routes across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, guided by an inherited knowledge of currents, winds, and celestial markers. It is knowledge that could only have originated from generations who survived a world very different from ours, a world shaped by sudden climatic upheaval and disappearing coastlines. In Africa and the Middle East, the oldest cities, temples, and pyramids hint at an understanding of catastrophic memory. The layers beneath the foundations of Giza and the valley temples contain signs of prior construction, water damage, and geological disturbance, suggesting that even in regions thought to be historically continuous, civilizations were rebuilding atop remnants of an older, almost erased past. The mythologies they left behind echo the same truth. Across cultures, humans remembered the forces that could destroy worlds. Flood myths, cosmic fire, sudden darkness, and the destruction of ancestral civilizations appear in Sumerian texts, Vedic hymns, Mayan codices, Greek legends, and indigenous oral traditions from the Americas and Australia. The similarities are not coincidental. These myths encode patterns of catastrophe observed over tens of thousands of years, providing a universal mnemonic of survival. Even the gods described in these myths may have been real survivors. They were sometimes described as towering beings, wise and powerful, teaching humans knowledge, mathematics, agriculture, or astronomy. Perhaps they were humans who survived cataclysm and carried the memory of an older world. Perhaps their divinity was a title of survival, those who could remember, encode, and preserve knowledge against the erasure of the earth. The first civilization's legacy, therefore, is not to be found in a single location. It is a network of memories scattered across continents, hidden in the alignment of stones, the positioning of temples, the constellations recorded in monuments, and the oral traditions passed down through millennia. And yet, there is an eerie precision to these scattered clues. Sites across the globe share geometric proportions, orientations, and alignments that could not have arisen independently by chance. They are signatures of a global awareness, evidence that the first civilization understood the planet in ways that transcended local culture. Some researchers suggest that this civilization was maritime in nature, connected by the vast Ice Age coastlines now submerged beneath modern seas. Submerged ruins off the coasts of India, Japan, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean may represent remnants of port cities or settlements designed to maintain this global network. If so, the first civilization was not just a series of isolated cultures, but a planetary civilization capable of observing long-term cycles of the Earth, predicting catastrophe, and encoding knowledge for future generations. And the message they left behind was subtle but clear. Survival depends on memory, not merely technology. On observation, not merely invention. On continuity, not merely presence. This realization reframes our understanding of ancient human history. It explains sudden leaps in agriculture, architecture, and astronomy. It explains why knowledge seems to appear fully formed in multiple regions simultaneously, without apparent antecedents. It explains why myths across continents describe catastrophes that align with real geological and astronomical events. And it explains why the Earth's deepest memory, encoded in stone, myth, and star, sometimes contradicts the official narrative of human prehistory. It is a lesson in humility. The first civilization shows that intelligence alone is not enough. Civilization can rise and fall, leaving behind ruins and myths, and yet the most crucial knowledge, the knowledge needed to survive the next planetary reset, can endure. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the first civilization existed, but how much of its memory we still carry, consciously or unconsciously. The stars, the stones, the myths, and even our sudden innovations may be echoes of that lost intelligence. Each observation of the heavens, each construction of monumental architecture, each encoded myth may represent a link in an unbroken chain of memory stretching far beyond what history currently acknowledges. And if this is true, then humanity today stands at a crossroads. We inherit more than technology. We inherit a memory encoded in the earth itself, a memory of survival, of cycles, of catastrophes, and of the potential to rebuild after the reset. The patterns are there to observe if we are willing to see them. The first civilization may have vanished physically, but it left behind a template for survival, scattered across the planet in ways we are only beginning to decipher. And perhaps, by understanding it, we can not only appreciate the depth of human history, but also prepare for the rhythms of the Earth that continue to this day. Because the cycle is ongoing, the planet still remembers, and the first civilization, encoded in stones, stars, and stories, may still be speaking if we are listening. And the clues are everywhere, hidden in plain sight, often misinterpreted or dismissed by mainstream archaeology. Consider the precision of megalithic construction. Across continents, from the Andes to the Himalayas, from Europe to Mesoamerica, stones were cut, fitted, and aligned with an understanding of weight, balance, and geometry that modern engineers struggle to replicate without machinery. The sheer size of some blocks, the complexity of interlocking joints, and the precision of their placement indicate not trial and error over generations, but inherited knowledge of physics, mathematics, and construction that predated the civilizations we typically credit with innovation. Take Puma Punku in Bolivia. The interlocking stones there exhibit angles and cuts so precise that even with today's tools, recreating them would be a monumental feat, yet this site is dated to around 500 to 600 CE, long after the supposed disappearance of advanced civilizations in the Americas. How did a post-classic society suddenly produce work of such sophistication? One theory suggests that the builders were working with the remnants of an older knowledge, passed down in fragments, memorized and reinterpreted after the collapse of a prior global civilization. Similarly, submerged ruins challenge accepted timelines. Off the coast of India in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar mapping has revealed structures that appear to be over 9,000 years old, submerged under more than 10 meters of water. These alignments suggest urban planning, with rectangular blocks, streets, and foundations that mirror layouts found in Mesopotamia thousands of years later. Could it be coincidence? Perhaps, but the repetition of these patterns across vast distances hints at a shared blueprint left by a vanished people. Planetary cycles also play a critical role in understanding these patterns. The Earth is not static. It oscillates, tilts, and shifts in predictable rhythms. Every 12,000 years or so, geological and climatic events reach peaks. Abrupt warming, ice sheet collapses, sea level rises, and tectonic upheavals. The Younger Dryas, ending roughly 11,600 years ago, is only the most recent example. If a civilization survived one of these resets, it would have had to develop strategies to encode survival knowledge into durable, low-risk formats, namely stone, myth, and astronomy. This is where the global echoes become staggering. Sites aligned to ancient star positions, Göbekli Tepe, the Nabta Playa circles in Egypt, the Caral pyramids in Peru, all indicate a shared awareness of celestial cycles far older than the civilizations officially credited with constructing them. The first civilization may have tracked precession, solstices, and planetary movements not merely for ritual, but as a method of encoding time itself. Monuments became calendars. Stone became a memory device. Myth became instruction. Even oral traditions preserve subtle hints. Aboriginal stories from Australia speak of sunken coastlines, lost islands, and ancestral beings who walked when the seas were lower. Mesoamerican myths tell of previous suns or worlds that were destroyed. Sumerian texts record antediluvian kings and sages. The similarities are too numerous and specific to be purely metaphorical. They are echoes of a shared memory, of a civilization that existed, observed, and encoded the rhythms of catastrophe. And in the layers of the earth itself, the evidence grows. Sediment cores from oceans and lakes reveal microspherules, high levels of iridium, and signs of sudden fires, markers consistent with cosmic impacts coinciding with major climatic shifts. Ice cores show abrupt temperature swings, atmospheric disturbances, and the sudden disappearance of species. These events match the timings encoded in myth, suggesting that the first civilization not only survived these resets, but meticulously recorded them in ways that could be interpreted by the next age. Even human anatomy and migration patterns hint at deep history. DNA evidence shows sudden dispersals, bottlenecks, and mysterious population shifts around the end of the Ice Age. Could these represent the survivors of a lost civilization, forced to flee and integrate into disparate groups, carrying fragments of their knowledge with them? The genetic record, like the archaeological one, is fragmented but suggestive, a hidden map of survival and transmission. Taken together, these anomalies suggest a radical reinterpretation of history. Civilization did not begin at a single point in time. It resurged from memory, guided by fragments of knowledge passed down across millennia. The first civilization may have been global, sophisticated, and deeply attuned to planetary cycles. Its fall was catastrophic, but its legacy survived through encoded stone, myth, and star. Later cultures, Sumerians, Egyptians, Andean societies, early Asian civilizations, did not invent all their knowledge. They reconstructed what remained, adapting it to local contexts, myths, and resources. And the implications are staggering. If humanity is inheriting knowledge from a civilization that survived a planetary reset, then history is not linear. It is cyclical, with civilization rising, falling, and rising again, guided by encoded memory. What we call prehistoric ignorance may instead be the gaps between memories, the intervals when knowledge had yet to be rediscovered, reconstructed, or repurposed. This interpretation also reframes the question of human potential. If the first civilization could track cosmic rhythms, build monuments capable of surviving catastrophes, and encode knowledge across generations, then modern humans, armed with the same cognitive abilities, are not inherently more capable. We are the current inheritors of an ancient memory, potentially on the same cycle that wiped out our predecessors. And yet, we have one advantage they did not: the ability to synthesize global evidence, to read the stones, myths, and stars collectively rather than in isolation. The story of the first civilization is thus not just a tale of loss. It is a manual for recognition. They encoded survival strategies across continents. They buried evidence deliberately. They marked stars, rivers, and coasts in ways that would survive millennia. And if we are perceptive enough, we can read these signs, reconstruct the lost knowledge, and understand both the fragility and resilience of human civilization. Perhaps, then, the first civilization did not vanish entirely. Perhaps it persists, not as living cities or machines, but as memory embedded in the world, in ways subtle, deliberate, and enduring. And now, for the first time in history, humanity is in a position to fully comprehend that memory, to see the 12,000-year rhythm, the planetary resets, and the enduring concept of survival encoded across the Earth. This is the final lesson. Civilizations rise, fall, and can rise again, but only if knowledge is preserved, observed, and understood. The stones, myths, and stars are not relics of the past. They are messages etched into the fabric of our world, awaiting recognition. And perhaps the first civilization, in leaving us these messages, anticipated not just our survival, but our curiosity, our capacity for interpretation, and our role in the continuation of memory across deep time. The further one digs into the archaeological record, the more persistent the anomalies become. Sites that should not exist according to the conventional timeline appear with startling regularity. Take the Nabta Playa complex in southern Egypt. For example, while mainstream history places the development of astronomy in Mesopotamia and Egypt much later, Nabta Playa, dating to roughly 6,000 to 7,000 BCE, aligns its stones precisely with solstices and even with certain bright stars, a calendar system encoded into the desert sands. Its creators left no written records, yet their understanding of celestial mechanics rivals civilizations that would appear millennia later. Similarly, Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, carved into limestone over 11,000 years ago, predates agriculture, organized cities, and metallurgy in the region. Its monumental T-pillars, engraved with enigmatic symbols of animals and abstract shapes, seem to encode narratives that extend beyond ritual into knowledge transmission. The sophistication of the site suggests it was built by people with architectural understanding far exceeding what their subsistence lifestyle would imply. Survivors of a lost civilization transmitting memory in stone. Across the globe, the pattern repeats. The precision of Machu Picchu's terraces, the foundation layers of Sacsayhuaman, the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, and the submerged platforms off Yonaguni Island all suggest knowledge preserved from a time older than the civilizations officially credited with their construction. The placement, proportion, and alignment of these structures hint at deliberate design meant to encode information through geometry, orientation, and durability. But it is not just stone that carries memory. Myths, oral traditions, and symbolic storytelling carry subtle hints of a pre-Ice Age world. Aboriginal Australian narratives speak of ancestors living on now submerged coastlines and islands, of creatures and peoples unlike those known today. Across the Pacific, Polynesian oral traditions describe a time of great waters, of islands vanishing beneath the waves, details that correspond closely to post-Ice Age sea level rise. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian kings claimed reigns lasting thousands of years and spoke of antediluvian sages imparting knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and law, figures whose lifespans and abilities defy conventional chronology, unless interpreted as memory of a lost culture encoded as myth. Astronomy emerges as another key marker. Alignments between monuments and celestial bodies across continents reveal an understanding of precession and the long-term movement of stars. Sites such as Stonehenge, Caerle, and the pyramids of Giza appear oriented to stars and constellations as they existed well before the known construction dates. This implies that whoever built or inspired these structures inherited astronomical knowledge spanning thousands of years. Knowledge that could only have come from a civilization observing the skies across multiple millennia. Even mathematics bears the mark of inheritance. The emergence of measurement systems, from cubits in Egypt to the sophisticated calendar of the Maya, suggests not independent invention, but transmission of abstract concepts. Numerical systems, geometry, and ratios appear across continents at roughly the same time, often in societies with no direct contact. It is as if the first civilization left a latent template of knowledge, waiting for later humans to rediscover it, decode it, and implement it. The patterns are not random. They indicate purposeful encoding, a civilization aware of catastrophic cycles, aware that much of its material culture could be destroyed, and aware that only certain forms of knowledge could survive deep time. Stone endures, myths endure, celestial patterns endure. By embedding critical information in these media, the first civilization created a system to teach future generations how to survive the rhythm of planetary resets. And here is where the evidence becomes truly unsettling. The cycles themselves are visible in geology, archaeology, and mythology. Ice cores, sediment layers, and planetary impact evidence indicate catastrophic events roughly every 12,000 years. Floods, fires, abrupt climate shifts, events that would have obliterated lowland civilizations. Correspondingly, myths worldwide recount similar narratives. Floods from the sky, fire raining down, darkness covering the land. The first civilization may have encoded historical records of global catastrophe into symbolic and structural forms, ensuring the survival of knowledge through events that would otherwise erase all memory. Migration patterns also reflect this inheritance. Around the end of the Ice Age, we see sudden dispersals of humans into previously uninhabitable regions, carrying innovations in agriculture, ceramics, and social organization. Genetic bottlenecks suggest population crashes consistent with catastrophic events. These surviving groups, scattered and often isolated, may have been the carriers of fragments of first civilization knowledge, reinterpreted for local conditions, yet preserving a coherent global memory network. Even in modern times, unexplained similarities persist. Geometric motifs appear across unrelated cultures. Myths echo the same catastrophes. Mathematical ratios and astronomical observations recur independently. Each fragment taken alone is intriguing. Taken together, they form a web of memory, a residual imprint of a civilization that existed before human history as we know it, and whose survivors seeded the knowledge that allowed subsequent civilizations to rise. The implications are profound. If a civilization existed prior to the last planetary reset, encoded knowledge across continents, and survived to transmit it to later humans, then our understanding of human history is incomplete. Civilization did not emerge linearly from hunter-gatherer societies. It is a recurrent phenomenon, rising from the preserved memory of earlier cultures. What we call invention may often be rediscovery. What we call myth may be the residual memory of actual events and knowledge. And the most chilling thought of all, the planet's cycles have not ended. The 12,000-year rhythm continues. Floods, climate shifts, impacts, these are part of Earth's natural pattern. The first civilization endured one cycle, encoded its lessons, and vanished. Now we are at the beginning of another cycle. The knowledge they left behind may not just be historical curiosity. It may be a warning and a guide, encoded for a civilization that has forgotten how fragile it truly is. In the end, the first civilization is less about cities or artifacts and more about memory. A deep, encoded intelligence preserved across the chaos of planetary resets. Its traces are subtle, enigmatic, and global, but they form a pattern that is gradually revealing itself. A civilization that rose, fell, and ensured that knowledge, the ultimate tool of survival, would endure. As the scattered pieces fall into place, a pattern emerges, a web of knowledge spanning oceans, continents, and millennia. From the sunken coasts of India to the stone terraces of the Andes, from Göbekli Tepe to Nabta Playa, from the legends of the Maya to the myths of Mesopotamia, the evidence points to one remarkable possibility. The first civilization was not a single culture, but a global network of societies. They shared knowledge, observed planetary rhythms, and encoded their understanding in ways designed to survive catastrophe. These societies were maritime in nature, living along Ice Age coastlines now lost beneath rising seas. Their cities, some of which are now submerged, were sophisticated centers of observation, trade, and construction. The global consistency of megalithic geometry, alignment with celestial bodies, and symbolic motifs across continents suggests deliberate transmission rather than coincidence. It is a network that was lost to the oceans, preserved in mountains, myths, and memory. And then there is the rhythm of resets. Geological and astronomical evidence shows a repeating pattern. Approximately every 12,000 years, the planet experiences rapid climate shifts, floods, and cosmic impacts. The Younger Dryas, with its sudden cooling and subsequent warming, is only the most recent documented example. The first civilization survived at least one of these cycles. They witnessed the world transformed by fire, water, and ice, and encoded their survival strategies in the most enduring media available. Stone, myth, and astronomy became memory devices. Massive blocks were cut and aligned to track the heavens, a celestial ledger of time. Myths recorded catastrophes and cycles, warning future generations of what might come. Submerged cities preserved urban layouts and knowledge under the ocean, like sealed time capsules awaiting rediscovery. Oral traditions carried the memory of lost coasts, vanished islands, and ancestral wisdom. Later civilizations inherited fragments of this memory, reconstructing cities, writing, agriculture, and astronomy from hints passed down through generations. Sumerian kings spoke of antediluvian sages. Egyptian pyramids were built atop older foundations. Andean terraces reflected knowledge of construction and astronomy far beyond their era, and Pacific navigators mastered the seas using inherited patterns of observation. Civilization did not begin anew. It resurged from memory. Even the myths of gods and sky beings take on a new significance. They may not have been divine, nor extraterrestrial, but survivors, human or near human, who preserved knowledge and guided subsequent generations. Their legacy is encoded in symbols, alignments, and stories that survive across continents, always pointing back to the cycles of Earth itself. This interpretation reframes human history. Knowledge does not accumulate linearly. It survives through cycles of catastrophe, reconstructed by those who inherit fragments of a prior civilization. What appears sudden, the rise of agriculture, writing, monumental architecture, may in fact be a rediscovery of wisdom deliberately preserved across millennia. And the implications extend beyond history. The 12,000-year rhythm has not ended. The cycles continue. Floods, abrupt climate shifts, and cosmic impacts are part of Earth's natural memory. The first civilization endured one such cycle and encoded its lessons. Now we stand at the beginning of another, and the evidence they left may serve as a warning as much as a record. Perhaps the first civilization's deepest gift was not physical structures, not written texts, nor myths, but the very concept of survival. The encoding of knowledge into enduring forms, stone, stars, story, created a system capable of surviving catastrophe, a memory network that allowed civilizations to rise again from the ashes. Their story is not one of lost cities, but of continuity, resilience, and foresight. And now humanity has the opportunity to read it, to reconstruct what was nearly erased, to understand the cycles, the rhythms, and the survival strategies embedded in the fabric of the Earth. If we listen, the first civilization may not be lost at all. It may still be guiding us through the monuments, myths, and stars they left behind, toward the understanding we need to survive, endure, and perhaps rise once more. Because the rhythm continues, the cycles do not stop, and the knowledge encoded by the first civilization is still waiting to be understood. Across the world, remnants of the first civilization lie hidden beneath the waves, buried beneath centuries of sediment, or obscured by forests and deserts. Off the coast of India, sonar mapping in the Gulf of Cambay has revealed rectangular foundations, walls, and streets submerged under more than 10 meters of water. These structures date back at least 9,000 years, long before the Indus Valley civilization arose. Their precise geometry, orientation, and spacing suggest urban planning, not random construction. The very existence of these sunken ruins forces a reconsideration of what human societies were capable of before recorded history, and what may have been lost to rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. Thousands of kilometers away, near the Japanese archipelago, the Yonaguni formations appear at first glance to be natural terraces of sandstone. Yet their sharp edges, stepped platforms, and linear channels hint at intentional design. Divers report features resembling roads, pyramidal structures, and circular plazas. If natural, the formations are an extraordinary coincidence. If artificial, they suggest advanced engineering that predates the earliest known civilizations in the region by millennia. And then there are the Caribbean anomalies. Submerged blocks near the Bahamas, arranged in rectilinear patterns spanning several hundred meters. Geologists have documented them as distinct from surrounding limestone, raising questions about human intervention. These formations lie precisely on coastlines that existed during the Ice Age, now drowned beneath the ocean, again suggesting a civilization aware of rising seas and capable of constructing monumental works along coastal plains that would one day vanish. Yet these ruins are only one piece of the puzzle. Across continents, the alignment of monuments with celestial events reveals a civilization that understood cycles far beyond a single human lifetime. The stone circles of Nabta Playa mark solstices and lunar standstills. Göbekli Tepe's pillars point to constellations as they appeared more than 11,000 years ago. In Peru, the terraces of Moray appear to mimic the sun's path across the sky, functioning as an agricultural laboratory that tracks solar intensity. These alignments suggest that the first civilization studied the heavens to record time, track cycles, and encode knowledge for survival. A global mnemonic system stretching from one shore to another, from one hemisphere to the next. Mythology complements the material evidence. Across the globe, traditions speak of worlds destroyed by water, fire, or celestial catastrophe, stories too consistent to be purely allegorical. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a flood that wiped out humanity, preserved only through a chosen survivor. In India, the Vedas describe cosmic weapons and floods washing away civilizations. The Maya recorded previous suns or ages, each destroyed before the present one. Aboriginal Australians tell of ancestral beings walking across now submerged coastlines. The parallels are striking, as if multiple cultures preserved a collective memory of catastrophe, embedded within narrative, ritual, and symbol. Even mathematical knowledge reflects this inheritance. Units of measurement, ratios, and architectural proportions appear independently across civilizations. The cubit in Egypt, the sacred geometry of Mesoamerica, and the dimensions of Andean terraces all share a sense of precision and standardization. These similarities suggest that knowledge was preserved and transmitted, often reconstructed from fragments, rather than invented independently. Taken together, the evidence paints a startling picture. A civilization that spanned continents, built cities along now-lost coastlines, encoded knowledge into stone and story, and survived a global catastrophe. Its survivors passed this knowledge along through oral traditions, architectural techniques, and celestial observations. Subsequent civilizations, Sumerians, Egyptians, Andeans, Mayans, and even early Asian cultures, did not invent all they knew. They were inheritors, reconstructing a memory network left by those who had endured the previous reset. This theory redefines human history. Civilization is not linear. It is cyclical. Knowledge does not always advance continuously. It can vanish and resurface across time, encoded in ways designed to endure planetary catastrophe. The first civilization may have known the rhythms of earth and the heavens, recorded them in stone, and ensured that fragments would survive. A legacy not of empire, but of survival. And the implications extend to us. The 12,000-year planetary rhythm has not stopped. Rising seas, climate shifts, and cosmic hazards are reminders that Earth is not static. The first civilization encoded warnings into the very memory of the planet. By studying submerged cities, star-aligned monuments, and myths, we are piecing together a survival guide left by those who came before. This civilization may no longer walk the earth, but its memory endures. And now, for the first time, humanity has the tools, archaeology, astronomy, geology, and cross-cultural analysis to understand it. The first civilization story is not just ancient history. It is a blueprint for recognizing cycles, preserving knowledge, and surviving the forces of nature that once nearly destroyed them. The evidence is all around us, in stone, water, and sky. The first civilization left clues not as curiosities, but as lessons for survival, scattered across continents, encoded in ways designed to survive the next planetary reset. And as we decode these fragments, a profound realization emerges. We may be the next link in a chain of memory stretching back tens of thousands of years, inheriting not only knowledge, but the responsibility to observe, understand, and endure. And so, after millennia of observation, myth, and mystery, a startling picture emerges. The first civilization was not a fleeting anomaly, nor a regional culture. It was global, sophisticated, and aware of the Earth's cycles, aware of catastrophe, aware of the fragility of memory itself. They built cities on Ice Age coastlines, aligned monuments to the stars, encoded warnings in myth, and preserved knowledge across generations, not knowing whether the next age would survive. Their cities, now submerged beneath oceans, were once thriving centers of observation, mathematics, and trade. Their stone monuments, scattered across continents, were not merely ceremonial. They were memory devices, recording the cycles of the heavens and the rhythms of the earth. Their myths, repeated across millennia and oceans, were not allegories. They were encoded lessons, warning of floods, fire, darkness, and the collapse of civilizations. Their mathematics, architecture, and astronomy were preserved and transmitted through reconstruction, guiding later cultures in the aftermath of planetary resets. This civilization did not vanish entirely. It survived in fragments, seeding knowledge across distant cultures. Sumerian kings who claimed antediluvian rains, Egyptian temples built atop older foundations, Andean terraces mirroring solar patterns, Polynesian navigation passed down through centuries. These are not coincidences. They are the echoes of survivors, the inheritors of a memory system deliberately designed to transcend disaster. And the cycles continue. Geological evidence, ice cores, and sediment layers show that catastrophic events occur roughly every 12,000 years. Sea levels rise, climates shift abruptly, and cosmic impacts leave their mark. The first civilization endured such a cycle, and through careful encoding, ensured that the knowledge to survive, knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and global patterns could persist. This is the central revelation. Civilization is cyclical, not linear. Human knowledge does not begin at one point and progress continuously. It resurfaces, reconstructed from fragments of prior memory, adapted to new circumstances, and encoded again for the next generation. What we call innovation may often be rediscovery. What we call myth may be memory. The first civilization represents the origin of this cycle, a civilization erased by catastrophe, yet preserved through intelligence, foresight, and encoded memory. The implications are profound. Humanity today is not the first to build, to observe, or to endure. We are the inheritors of memory stretching back tens of thousands of years. The stones, the myths, the submerged cities, the star alignments, they are more than relics. They are a message, a survival guide hidden in plain sight. And the Earth's rhythm reminds us that the cycles are ongoing. The planet still possesses the capacity to reset, and knowledge, encoded and preserved, may be our only safeguard. Perhaps the deepest lesson of the first civilization is philosophical rather than material. It is a lesson in humility, continuity, and vigilance. Intelligence alone does not guarantee survival. Civilization can vanish in a single catastrophe, leaving only memory. Yet memory, encoded in the enduring forms of stone, story, and observation, can transcend destruction, bridging ages, and giving future generations the tools to endure what the planet may bring. Their story, hidden in plain sight, is not one of despair but of resilience. It challenges our assumptions about linear progress, about the origin of knowledge, and about humanity's place in Earth's long history. It asks us to read the stones, observe the heavens, and listen to the echoes of myths not as fiction, but as lessons preserved across deep time. And perhaps, if we heed these messages, if we study the cycles, the catastrophes, and the encoded knowledge left across continents, we can honor the first civilization not by rebuilding their cities, but by learning from their memory, understanding the rhythms of our planet, and ensuring that humanity survives the next chapter in the 12,000-year cycle. The first civilization may have vanished physically, but it lives in memory, in myth, in alignment, and now in us. Its legacy is not merely history, it is survival itself, a reminder that civilizations rise, fall, and can rise again, but only if knowledge is preserved, observed, and understood. The clues are everywhere, in stone, in story, in the stars. And now it is up to us to see them, to interpret them, and to continue the cycle of memory and survival. For the first civilization may have left us the greatest gift of all. The understanding that the world endures, knowledge endures, and perhaps with attention and care, humanity can endure as well. Because the rhythm continues, the cycles do not stop, and the memory of the first civilization still speaks, if we are listening.